In a world where humans were pushing the limits of science, they had built something new, something no one had ever seen before, a human prototype, stronger, smarter, and designed to survive the harshest conditions. Yet, instead of praise, the prototype was met with laughter. He walked through the laboratory halls, feeling the cold stares of the scientists and engineers. Some whispered that he was a mistake, a failed experiment. Others openly mocked him, calling him weak, fragile, and useless. But he did not respond. His mind was focused on something far bigger than their laughter. Outside the lab, the winter had already begun to bite. Snow fell thick and heavy, covering the metal structures in white. The scientists had warned that this winter would be unlike any other. A storm meant to test not just humans, but the very technology they had created. The prototype knew that if he failed, it would not just be his name, but the hope of the project that would be lost. He remembered the first day he woke up. The engineers had celebrated the success of his systems, but the humans who watched him were cruel. They pointed at his unusual strength, the way he moved faster than any man, the way he could lift heavy machines without effort. Yet all they saw was something strange, something to fear. Despite their mockery, he trained quietly, his body learning to endure pain, cold, and hunger, his mind thinking of ways to survive the coming winter. The world outside might not care about him, but he would prove it wrong. He would show that the prototype was not just a tool, but a human with heart and courage. One evening, as the wind howled and snow fell like a thick blanket, the prototype stood outside, watching the horizon. He could see the first signs of the harsh winter approaching. Trees bent under the weight of snow, rivers froze over, and the sky turned grey and heavy. He knew that surviving this winter would be his greatest challenge yet. Inside the lab, the scientists laughed at him again. "He will not last a week," one said. "Why waste resources on something that will fail?" Another nodded. "Let him try. Winter will break him faster than any test we can give." The prototype heard them, but he did not feel anger. He felt determination, a fire burning quietly inside, telling him that he would survive, no matter what. As night fell, he packed the essentials for the journey ahead. Small devices to measure temperature, a simple map, and rations enough for a few days. But what he carried most was hope. Hope that he could endure what no other human could, that he could survive, not because he was made in a lab, but because he had the will to fight. The first step out of the laboratory was the hardest. The scientists watched, some curious, some amused, some shaking their heads at what they called a foolish adventure. Snow covered his feet, wind cut across his face, and cold tried to push him back, but he kept moving, step by step, toward the unknown, toward the winter that everyone feared. And as he disappeared into the white horizon, a thought crossed his mind. "They laughed at me, they said I would fail, but I will survive, I will endure, I will prove them wrong." And with that silent promise, the prototype began his journey, alone, mocked, and underestimated, yet ready for a winter that was meant to break him. The world outside the lab was no longer the same. Snow covered everything, thick and silent. The wind blew like a knife, cutting through the prototype's coat. But he did not stop. He had faced mockery, he had faced doubt. But this was different. This was nature itself, testing him, pushing him to the edge. The prototype moved carefully, his eyes scanning the white horizon. Every step was difficult, snow sinking into his boots, frost biting his skin. But he had learned to endure, learned to observe, learned to survive. He knew the winter was not just cold, it was deadly, and every choice could be the difference between life and death. He had only a few supplies, enough for a short journey. The lab had given him some rations, a small map, and tools to help. But the storm was bigger than anything the engineers had imagined. Trees were broken by the wind, rivers were frozen solid, and the sky was heavy with grey clouds, promises of snow that would not end for days, maybe weeks. Hours passed, and the cold grew worse. His rations were running low, and the biting wind made him shiver to his bones. He realized he needed shelter, something strong, safe, something to survive this deadly winter. And then, through the storm, he saw it. A stone oven, old and abandoned, half buried in snow. Its stone walls were cracked, but it was strong, a spark of hope in the frozen wasteland. He moved toward it, digging through the snow, trying to make a small fire. It was not easy. The wood was damp, the wind threatened to blow out every spark. But the prototype had patience, and he had knowledge. He managed to light a small flame, and the warmth spread slowly, fighting the cold, giving him a place to rest, a place to survive. As he warmed himself, he heard something small, a faint cry from the snow. Curious, he moved closer, and there, shivering and weak, was a small cub. Its fur was dirty, matted, and it looked at him with eyes full of fear. The prototype's heart stirred. He knew the cub was as alone as he was, maybe even weaker, maybe even in more danger. He had a choice: ignore the cub and save his own energy, or help it and risk his own survival. But something inside him decided, this was not just survival, this was humanity, this was compassion. The prototype carefully fed the cub some of his rations, wrapped it in a small blanket, and placed it near the fire. The cub shivered at first, but slowly, it warmed up, and as the prototype watched, he realized something strange. The cub was intelligent. It observed him, its eyes sharp and curious. Not just an animal, but a companion, someone who could survive alongside him, maybe even help him. Outside, the storm raged on, louder and stronger than before, but inside the stone oven, there was warmth, a spark of hope, and the prototype knew one thing. This winter would be deadly. Yes, but he was not alone now, and maybe, just maybe, with the cub by his side, he could endure what no human had before. And as the night grew darker, and the storm howled louder, the prototype made a silent promise to the cub. We survive together, no matter what comes. The snow fell harder, the wind screamed, but inside that small stone oven, life and hope remained. The storm raged on outside, relentless and cruel, snow piled higher, and the wind howled through the broken trees like a chorus of ghosts. But inside the small stone oven, the prototype and the cub huddled together, warmth slowly returning to their bodies, hope quietly growing. The cub, once shivering and weak, now moved with more energy. Its small paws padded softly on the stone floor. Its eyes watched the prototype carefully, almost as if it understood him. The prototype studied the cub too, noticing its sharp instincts, how it sniffed the air, alert to danger. Its presence was no longer a burden, but a gift. Days passed, and the prototype realized how much he depended on the cub. When he went to gather wood for the fire, the cub would follow, helping to find the driest branches. When he searched for food, the cub would alert him to hidden dangers. Its sharp senses seemed to see what the human could not. One morning, the prototype woke to find the cub staring out of the oven entrance, ears raised, tail stiff, its eyes locked on something in the snow. He looked too, and saw a faint shadow moving between the trees. Something large, something dangerous. His heart raced, but the cub did not panic. It growled low, warning, ready to defend. The prototype understood immediately. They were not alone, and the forest held more than snow and wind. Creatures, perhaps wild and hungry, prowled this frozen land. They could strike at any moment. They could take everything from him. But now, he was not facing them alone. The cub was by his side, a companion, a protector, and perhaps even a teacher. Over the next few days, the prototype and the cub grew closer, trust forming between them, silent and strong. They shared food, warmth, and even small moments of play, and slowly, the prototype began to notice something incredible. The cub seemed to learn, not just follow. Its movements became clever, anticipating danger, finding hidden shelters, even helping him catch small animals. One evening, as the storm began to calm slightly, the prototype reflected on their journey so far. He had left the lab alone, mocked by humans, expecting failure, and yet here he was, not just surviving, but thriving in ways they could never imagine, all because he had chosen to help, to care, to act with courage, and all because he had an unexpected companion. But danger was never far away. The forest was full of predators and hazards. The winter showed no mercy, and the prototype knew he had to keep moving, keep surviving, or they would both perish. He packed some supplies, gathered firewood, and together with the cub, stepped into the snow once more, alert, ready, and determined. As they walked, snow crunching underfoot, the cub ran ahead, sniffing and listening, its small growl warning the prototype of every hidden threat, and for the first time, he felt something he had never felt before, not fear, not doubt, but confidence. Confidence that they could face this deadly winter together, that no storm, no predator, no challenge could break them if they trusted each other. And so, with the cub at his side, the prototype continued through the frozen wasteland, each step a struggle, each breath a victory. But the bond they shared gave him strength, a spark of hope in a world meant to destroy him, and as the snow fell heavier, and the wind screamed louder, he whispered softly to his companion, "We survive together, always." The winter had reached its fiercest hour, snow and wind no longer just cold, but sharp and punishing. The prototype and the cub moved carefully through the frozen forest, every step a battle, every breath a challenge. Yet they had learned to trust each other, and that trust was their greatest strength. The cub led the way, sniffing the snow for hidden dangers, alerting the prototype when a branch threatened to snap under their weight, or when the snow hid a deep hole. The prototype followed, quietly amazed at the cub's intelligence. It was no ordinary animal. It had grown into a clever, brave companion, essential to survival. Finding food was harder now. The snow had buried small animals, and rivers were frozen solid. The prototype had to think creatively, using scraps from the stone oven and small traps. He caught enough to feed both himself and the cub. Even in the bitter cold, he smiled when the cub happily devoured the meal, its sharp eyes gleaming with life and gratitude. But survival was more than hunger. The winter tested them at every turn. A sudden blizzard struck one afternoon, covering everything in white, visibility vanished, and the wind threatened to sweep them off the frozen ground. The prototype searched quickly for shelter, snow swirling around him, teeth chattering, heart racing. The cub growled low, guiding him to a narrow cave hidden by snow. Inside, they found dry moss, and he quickly built a small fire. The warmth was weak, but enough to keep them alive. As he watched the flames flicker, the prototype realized something important. Survival was not just about strength or intelligence, but about courage, teamwork, and hope. Night fell, and with it came the predators. Wolves and other wild creatures roamed near the cave, their eyes glinting in the darkness. Hunger drove them close, but the cub stood fearless, growling and circling the entrance, warning the prototype of any movement, ready to defend, ready to fight. The prototype reinforced their shelter, using rocks, wood, and clever traps. He had learned from every moment of hardship, every snowstorm, every frozen river, every near-death encounter. Now, he combined his intelligence with his physical strength and the cub's instincts, forming a team stronger than any single force. Days passed, and the winter continued to rage, but slowly, the prototype and cub adapted, moving faster, hunting smarter, surviving longer. Each challenge made them stronger. Each danger tested their bond, and with every step, they proved that no winter, no storm, no challenge could break them. One morning, the blizzard cleared briefly, revealing the frozen world around them. The prototype looked out over the endless white horizon. The cub sat beside him, tail wrapped around its paws, both tired, both battered, but alive. Their bond had transformed them from prey to survivors, from outcasts to legends. The prototype whispered softly, as if promising himself and the cub, "We have survived the worst so far, but the world is still waiting. The winter is not finished, and neither are we." And with that, he stood, lifting his head to the sky, ready for whatever came next. For in this frozen wasteland, he had learned that survival was not just about enduring, but about rising stronger every time. The winter was ending, slowly and quietly. The wind no longer howled with the same fury. Snow softened under the weak sunlight, and the frozen rivers began to crack and flow again. The prototype and the cub had survived what no human had dared to face. Their journey through the frozen wasteland had transformed them both. The prototype looked at the cub, now strong and healthy, its fur clean, eyes bright, and tail wagging with life. He realized that this little companion had been more than a helper. It had been his teacher, showing him patience, courage, and loyalty. The bond they shared had turned loneliness into strength, mockery into purpose. As they moved through the thawing landscape, the prototype saw signs of life returning. Birds cautiously returned to the trees, small animals emerged from hiding, and humans, curious and fearful, began to explore the forest where he had survived alone. They whispered in awe, for the prototype had become more than an experiment, more than a mocked creation. He had become a legend, a symbol of endurance and ingenuity. The stone oven that had saved them many times stood like a monument in the snow. Its warmth and shelter had been a lifeline, a reminder that even in the harshest conditions, survival was possible with intelligence, courage, and trust. The cub ran ahead, playful yet alert, guiding the prototype to safer paths, proving that their partnership had grown stronger than any storm. For the first time, the prototype felt pride, not in the design that humans had mocked, but in himself, in his ability to endure, to think, to act with kindness, to protect another being. The winter had tested him, broken him, and yet rebuilt him stronger. His laughter, once silent in the mockery of the lab, now echoed quietly in the forest, a sound of triumph, of life, of hope. But even as the snow melted, he knew the world still held challenges. Other winters would come, other dangers would arise. Yet he was no longer afraid, for he had faced the impossible, and with the cub at his side, he could face anything. They had survived not just by strength or skill, but by working together, by trusting each other, by refusing to give up. When humans returned to the forest, they saw the proof of his journey, tracks in the snow, clever shelters, signs of life in the harshest land. They could no longer laugh, could no longer mock, for the prototype had shown them that survival, courage, and heart were stronger than science alone, that even a being built in a lab could rise above expectations and achieve greatness. The prototype paused on a small hill, looking at the horizon. The cub sat beside him, ears twitching, eyes bright, ready for whatever came next, and in that quiet moment, he realized something profound. He was no longer just a prototype, no longer just a creation. He was a survivor, a companion, a hero of his own story. With a final glance at the thawing forest, he whispered softly to the cub, "We did it. We survived. And this is only the beginning. The cub nuzzled his hand, a simple gesture of trust and friendship, and together, they stepped forward into the new world, ready to face whatever adventures awaited, for the winter had ended. But their story, the story of courage, hope, and the bond between human and companion, was only beginning.